The boardroom that morning felt like ice. The steady tap of a pen against the table echoed like a countdown, each strike warning of something inevitable. At the head of the table sat Robert Hale, 65 years old, the man who had built this company from nothing. His suit was worn, his hair silver, but his eyes still burned with the same fire that had carried him through decades of battles. Then his eldest son stood up, voice sharp enough to cut the room in half. "Dad, it's time you enjoy retirement. We'll take it from here." Before Robert could respond, a young executive leaned forward, smirking with the kind of arrogance only the untested carry. "The company needs fresh blood, not old ideas." Every gaze shifted toward Robert as if he were nothing more than a relic, an artifact ready to be put on a shelf. But Robert said nothing. He lifted his eyes toward the company's logo on the wall, the very symbol he had designed, the dream he had risked everything to build. In that silence, he didn't see age. He saw the nights he mortgaged his house, the endless hours writing code until dawn, the moments he stared down bankruptcy and refused to fall. They thought time had made him weak, but legacy doesn't fade. And then, like a low thunder, the voiceover sets the tone. "At 65, they told me to step aside. But they forgot one thing: vision doesn't age." The vote came swift and merciless. One by one, hands rose around the table. Old allies, new faces, even his own blood, each chose to push Robert aside. The motion carried. In a matter of minutes, the founder of Hale Technologies was no longer its leader. They handed him a new title, dressed in courtesy but hollow in truth: honorary advisor. A chair without a voice, a position with no power, a quiet exile. His children spoke of progress, of modern leadership, of how he had done enough. The younger executives nodded, eager to bury the past and crown themselves the future. Robert didn't argue. He simply walked back to his office, the same four walls where every dream had begun. But it wasn't the same anymore. The shelves were bare, the phone silent. Even the nameplate on his door felt like a cruel reminder of what had been taken. He sat down slowly at his desk, his hand brushing against an old photograph, the day the company was born. In it, a younger Robert stood proudly beside his wife, holding the first prototype. Their smiles glowed with promise. Now, staring at that picture, he felt something break deep inside, like they hadn't just stripped him of a title, but severed a piece of his life itself. The voiceover deepens, steady and heavy. "They thought they'd buried me in silence, but silence can be the sharpest blade." The photograph in Robert's hand pulled him backward in time. The quiet of his empty office blurred, replaced by the chaos of a one-bedroom apartment 3 decades earlier. Stacks of ramen cups on the counter, wires snaking across the floor. A young Robert, face lit only by the glow of a battered computer screen, typing until his fingers cramped. His wife asleep on the couch behind him, a blanket pulled over her shoulders because they couldn't afford heating that winter. He remembered signing the papers that mortgaged their house. The pen shook in his hand, but his voice never did. "This company will be our family's future," he'd promised. Flash forward, pitch meetings. He was laughed out of rooms, told his idea was too big, too impossible. Still, he knocked on every door, carrying prototypes in cardboard boxes, his suit worn thin from rejection. Twice, bankruptcy nearly crushed him. Once he sat in his car outside a shuttered office, wondering if it was all over. But then he saw his children's drawings taped to the dashboard, crayon sketches of computers with their dad's name on them. That night, he fought back. That night, Hale Technologies survived. And survive it did. Year by year, brick by brick, Robert built an empire. Not through shortcuts, not through luck, but through sacrifices no one in that boardroom had ever made. The narration drops low, resolute. "They see an old man. I see the scars that built this company. Every sleepless night, every risk, every loss, those weren't mistakes. They were the foundation. And foundations don't crumble." They mistook his silence for surrender. What they didn't know was that Robert had never been louder. While the new board flaunted their modern leadership, Robert began working in the shadows. He called no press conferences, made no speeches. Instead, he picked up the phone. Quietly, one by one, he reached out to the shareholders who remembered. The ones who'd been saved by his stubbornness when the company nearly went under. The ones who still believed in the man who had carried them through storms. At night, when the building slept, his office light burned. Not with nostalgia, but with invention. On his desk sat a sleek prototype, the product of years of secret work. A technology so bold it could redefine the company's future. No one knew it existed but him, and he didn't stop there. Robert began collecting whispers, expense reports that didn't add up, shell companies tied to board members, deals that smelled of corruption. Slowly, he wove a net, one that would tighten around those who had betrayed him. He never raised his voice, never showed his hand. Every smile he gave at board luncheons, every polite nod, it was all camouflage. Behind those calm eyes, Robert Hale was sharpening his blade. The voiceover deepens, pulsing with restrained fire. They thought I was too old to fight. What they didn't realize is that the sharpest warriors don't fight with fists. They fight with patience, with truth, with vision. The shareholder meeting was meant to be a coronation. The boardroom gleamed with glass and chrome, cameras ready to capture the new era. The younger executives strutted across the stage, delivering polished speeches about innovation, progress, and leaving the old ways behind. They smiled as if Robert Hale no longer existed. But then the doors opened, and he walked in. The room went still. He wasn't supposed to be here, not today, not after they had stripped him of power. Yet there he was, 65, silver hair under the lights, steady hands carrying a slim laptop. Without waiting for permission, Robert stepped onto the stage. His eldest son's jaw tightened. The young executives sneered. The crowd whispered. Robert set the laptop down, his voice calm but cutting through the silence. You speak of the future, but you forgot who built your present. The screen behind him flickered to life. Lines of code, diagrams, and a prototype video filled the wall. His secret project, the breakthrough no one else had even imagined. Gasps rippled through the audience. This, Robert continued, is not theory, it's real, and it will change everything we thought possible. Then with surgical precision, he pressed another key. The screen shifted, emails, financial statements, backroom deals. Evidence of corruption by the very board members who had stolen his chair. Names, numbers, proof. The room erupted, shareholders shouting, cameras flashing, whispers turning into roars. Executives who had smirked minutes ago now sat pale, sweat beading on their brows. And Robert stood unshaken, eyes locked on the people who betrayed him. Narration surges like a drumbeat. They wanted me gone, but instead I gave them truth. And truth, once revealed, can never be buried again. The room was chaos, shareholders shouting, reporters scribbling, board members paling under the weight of their exposed sins. But above the storm, one voice cut through, his eldest son. He slammed his hand on the table, his face red with fury. This is pathetic, Dad. You think a flashy demo and a few old files make you fit to lead. You're too old, too stubborn, too out of touch. This company doesn't need you anymore. The boardroom fell silent, all eyes snapping to Robert. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he stepped forward, his gaze steady, his voice like steel wrapped in calm. You see wrinkles, Robert said, his tone measured. I see battle scars. Every line on this face was earned keeping this company alive when no one else believed. Every scar means I bled for what we built, and you call that weakness. He let the words hang, his son's anger crashing against a wall of unshakable resolve. This company was never built on youth or age, Robert continued, his voice rising just enough to fill the room. It was built on vision, and that vision is mine. It always has been. His son tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. The room had shifted. Shareholders nodded. Reporters scribbled faster. Even some board members who once turned on Robert now leaned toward him as if gravity itself had changed sides. Robert's eyes didn't leave his son. He didn't shout. He didn't gloat. He simply delivered the truth. You thought you could erase me, but you forgot one thing: legacy doesn't ask permission. It endures. The silence after was heavier than any shout. His son looked down, his shoulders stiff, but his defeat written clear in his eyes. The silence after Robert's words was thick enough to choke on. Then a single voice rose from the back of the room. "I call for a new vote." It was one of the oldest shareholders, a man Robert had once saved from financial ruin decades earlier. Others quickly echoed, their voices building into a tide the board could not stop. Ballots were cast. Electronic votes clicked in. The results flashed onto the massive screen for all to see. Robert Hale, reinstated as CEO. The room erupted. Some cheered, others gasped, but the verdict was undeniable. Robert, cast out only weeks ago, now stood restored at the helm of the empire he had built. The young executives shifted nervously, their corruption laid bare. Lawyers whispered in corners, subpoenas already being prepared. Several would soon face charges for fraud and abuse of power. The so-called new era had collapsed before it even began. Robert's son sat frozen, jaw clenched, his arrogance drained away. Finally, he stood, his voice barely above a whisper. I was wrong." Robert met his eyes. No triumph, no gloating, only calm authority. "You weren't wrong to want the future," he said quietly. "You were wrong to forget the foundation. The future means nothing if you tear out the roots." For the first time, his son lowered his head, not in defeat, but in humility. Around them, the company began to shift. Robert wasted no time. He announced a restructuring, not to tighten his grip, but to prepare true leaders, ones with vision, not ego. Narration rolls in steady and final. Justice isn't revenge, it's restoration. And that day, justice returned to Hale Technologies. The boardroom lights had dimmed. The shouting, the chaos, the vote, it was all over. Robert Hale sat alone in his office once more, but this time it wasn't empty. On his desk, two objects lay side by side. One, a battered old laptop, its keys worn smooth from years of use. The same machine on which the first lines of code for Hale Technologies were born. The other, a sleek, polished prototype of his newest invention, gleaming under the soft desk light. Past and future. Foundation and vision. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city stretched out before him, glowing with the pulse of millions of lives his company had touched and would continue to shape. Robert leaned back in his chair, the weight of betrayal behind him, the fire of purpose still in his eyes. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself a faint, quiet smile. The narration drops into a final, resonant note. "At 65, they told me to step aside. But legacies are not handed over, they are defended. And mine will endure." Fade to black. The logo of Hale Technologies flickers across the screen, steady and timeless.